My name is Sharon Kamiya. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, and lived there for the first 2 years of my life. I totally don't remember anything about Chicago. I grew up in Venice, California. We lived in a tiny little house funded by the GI Bill because my father was in the U.S. Army. So I am here today to talk about my family, and my earliest recollections were always spending lots of time with Ji-chan and Ba-chan. They lived in West Los Angeles, just about 5 miles away from us, so every weekend we would go visit them, and my grandparents were just great. You know, they were just very involved with us, and I remember stories, though, that my mother would tell us about what happened during the war. She would talk about her father and growing up and how close she was to him. He was a atypical Issei in that he was very loving and especially just adored his daughter, and she was so close to him, as were her two brothers. And so when she was actually at a skating rink with her friends when she heard the announcement about Pearl Harbor, and they were just horrified. And sometime after that, I can't remember how much longer, not too long after, that was in March of 1942, she came home from school and only to find the house completely torn apart. And my grandmother was bewildered, and they asked where she was, and my grandmother didn't speak or read English. So she gave the warrant to my sister and brothers, and it said that he had been arrested and taken away. And at the time, they didn't know where he was. It took a while to find him. I think it was about 2 days later they found him, and they were able to talk to him through a fence with barbed wire on top. They couldn't touch him, and he looked like he had been up for 2 days, and he was disheveled, and they were basically interrogating him like under a bare bulb, that type of thing, about his connections with the Japanese community. This all happened because he was active with the Japanese language school in West Los Angeles, and he was a vice president at one time and an auditor at another time. And I think he was paid something like between $1 and $3 a year to serve on this position. And that was his only connection to Japan in that way. And so they were apparently interrogating him to see if he was somehow spreading propaganda through the Japanese school, and he had he claimed no knowledge of any of that. Then my mother said that he had then been taken to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And this is where, as a young girl growing up, I got a little confused because he was in Santa Fe, and then for a while he was in Tule Lake, and so I wasn't quite sure what was going on, but the gist of it was that he was gone for the entire duration of the war. He just seemed kind of like the air had been let out of him. And just by looking at his photographs before the war and after, when he came back, he aged so much. He went in as a robust younger man and came out a very old man. And that's why I think when I remember him, he was just kind of there. You know, he was just sort of it was hard for me to reconcile this man that my mother would talk about and this old man that was just sitting there in the kitchen, really not talking to anybody, smoking his cigarette and drinking his beer with a whiskey chaser. Yeah, so he was diminished definitely after the war. I'd like to remember him as the father that my mother had as a child, the very fun-loving and loving father, how he took care of his children so well, and did funny things like throwing noodles up against the wall. There was another picture of him before the war wearing a suit. He had his foot on the floorboard of somebody else's car. It was a very nice car, and he probably had a friend and said, "Quick, take a picture." And he looked very dapper and proud. I mean, again, he was a very handsome man. I like to remember him in the pre-war days, I guess.